The bell had already rung when the children spilled out of the low brick schoolhouse, their voices sharp and bright against the quiet of the village street. A few drifted toward the market road. Others were gathered up by mothers or grandparents waiting under the neem trees. But near the iron gate, pressed to the dust and shadow, sat the same figure that had become part of the routine. A dog, lean but not feral, its ears pitched forward, body taut as though listening for one sound alone. It was not the restless pacing of a stray hunting for scraps. This animal did not nose through wrappers or chase after the younger children. He sat motionless, brown coat dulled by dust, tail curled stiff around his paws. His gaze, unshifting, searched the faces of those leaving. A boy dropped half a chapati by accident. The dog ignored it, eyes fixed on the flow of uniforms and lunch pails. The older women had started whispering weeks ago. "Every day," they murmured, shaking their heads as they filled their baskets. Some children grew bold, reaching to touch his back as they passed. He tolerated them but did not move, as though tethered by something unseen. On certain afternoons, when the light faded into a rust-orange wash across the village road, the dog's posture would soften for only a second, his ears dropping at the sight of a particular doorway. Yet no one stepped out for him. Today the wind carried a dry smell of fields beyond harvest, and the street was thinning fast. A bicycle rattled past, the rider throwing the dog a wary glance. He neither flinched nor chased. From the classroom still open, chalk dust drifted into the air, pale against the blue of late afternoon. The caretaker came to swing the gates shut but hesitated. The dog did not resist being nudged aside, only shifted enough to remain just beyond the boundary, as if the invisible line of that schoolyard was not his to cross. A teacher lingered on the steps, shawl drawn close against the cool. She had noticed him before, but never this intent, this persistence. When she bent to collect her satchel, she caught his eyes, dark, still, waiting. It was not hunger there, nor the sharp glint of strays that learned to scavenge. Something heavier held him, a patience almost human in its endurance. The last voices of children carried down the lane, fading toward the fields and the bus stop. Dust settled. The teacher's sandals scuffed against stone as she started her walk home. Behind her the dog rose at last. His movement was measured, deliberate, not the bounce of greeting but the step of one who must follow. He did not approach her, nor did he beg. He kept his distance, shadowing the line of the gate until she turned the corner. By the time the sun dropped low, the street was empty but for him. He stood there once more, shoulders squared toward the silent gate, breath visible in the cooling air. The hush of dusk pressed close, broken only by the faint sound of a child's laughter carried far from the houses. The dog's ears twitched, his body stiffened, and for the first time, his gaze flickered, not at the school, not at the street, but at some unseen point beyond. He lowered himself to the ground again, curling into the dust as if he had all the time in the world to wait. Yet, in the stillness of his posture, in the way his chest rose and fell with controlled rhythm, there was something unresolved, an absence that anchored him there, day after day. No one could say what he was waiting for, but the air itself seemed to hold its breath with him, as though guarding a truth that had not yet surfaced. Evening fell slower than usual, the kind of twilight where shadows seemed to stretch and hesitate before surrendering to night. The dog had not moved from his station by the gate, though the road was long emptied. A low breeze combed through the tamarind branches, setting their leaves to rustle like distant whispers. The stillness broke when the caretaker returned with his lantern. Its glow spilled across the wall, and for an instant it revealed what had gone unnoticed before, a faint scrape along the dog's flank. Raw against his dust-darkened coat, the wound was not new, but tonight it was more visible. When he shifted to rise, his right hind leg trembled before bearing weight. He adjusted quickly, masking it with practiced balance, yet the effort betrayed him. The caretaker muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. He swung the lantern higher, but the dog lowered his gaze, neither retreating nor advancing. Only the wound spoke, a silent clue that waiting here carried a cost. By the time the street was swallowed in darkness, the teacher who had lingered earlier passed again. She halted when she noticed the limp. The dog had risen as if expecting someone, yet not her. His body leaned toward the gate, ears tuned to the silence beyond. When nothing stirred, he sank down again, curling himself tight against the iron bars. The teacher's step faltered. For a moment she seemed about to speak, then only watched as the dog's breathing slowed into the rhythm of patient endurance. She left, her sandals tapping faintly against stone, but her glance backward was longer than before. Night deepened, and with it the air cooled. The dog did not howl, did not whimper. Instead, he pressed his head against the bars of the gate, as though trying to smell what lay beyond. Once, twice, he shifted his weight as if debating whether to cross the line he had never dared to breach. Each time he pulled back. His restraint was not fear, but discipline, something older and harder to name. Far into the night, a sound finally came, a distant engine rattling unevenly across the fields. The dog's head rose sharply. His ears snapped forward, tail rigid. The engine noise grew nearer, then passed the street without stopping. Still he stood, body taut, tracking it until it vanished into the countryside. Only then did he sink back, though the tension remained in every line of his frame. He had expected someone. They had not arrived. The following morning, mist lay heavy along the street. Children trotted past him with their bags slung, giggling about something unseen. One of them, bolder than the rest, paused to offer a sweet wrapped in cellophane. The dog's nose twitched, but he turned his head away. His eyes returned to the gate, to the trickle of pupils streaming in. His refusal startled the boy, who pocketed the sweet again before running inside. Behind him, the dog resumed his vigil, the limp more pronounced in the damp air. As lessons droned on inside the classrooms, he shifted uneasily, rising and sitting, rising again, never wandering far. A drizzle began, thin at first, then steady. The rain tapped against tin roofs, washing chalk dust into the soil. The dog did not seek shelter. Instead, he sat upright, water running in rivulets along his back, his wound darkening with moisture. To anyone passing, he looked less like a stray and more like a sentry carved into the landscape, unyielding, fixed, defined by duty. By midday, the drizzle cleared. The street brightened, but the dog did not dry quickly. His fur clung to his frame, revealing a body worn yet resilient. A small girl carrying books twice her size stopped to stare at him. Something in her eyes shifted. Less curiosity, more recognition, but before she could linger, an older boy tugged her arm, hurrying her inside. The dog tracked her until she vanished through the doorway. His ears lowered, his body leaned forward, almost against the gate. For a heartbeat he looked ready to push through, to break the rule he had set for himself. But he didn't. That hesitation was new. It left the street unsettled, as though an unseen boundary had been tested. The iron gate bore the mark of his presence, streaked where his damp coat had pressed against it. The silence that followed carried weight. Something had shifted, not in the dog's wound, not in his posture, but in his resolve. By evening, when the lantern was raised again, his eyes held not only patience but a restlessness that had not been there before. And in the faint print of his paw pressed into the wet soil by the threshold, a question lingered. How long before he decided to cross it? The street lay quiet under the pale wash of late afternoon, when even the dust seemed to hesitate before lifting. The dog had not moved since the children left, his body still pressed to the cold stone near the gate. Only when a sparrow darted low did he lift his head, eyes narrowing at the sound of quick wings. His ears twitched again, but this time it wasn't for a bird. Somewhere beyond the far fields, faint at first, came the grinding hum of an approaching truck. The sound did not unsettle him. Instead, he rose slowly, every rib visible beneath the stretch of his skin, and stepped forward, as though pulled by a thread no one else could see. The teacher, who had lingered by the last row of neem trees, noticed the change. She had grown accustomed to his routine, the waiting, the silence, but now his stance was altered. His tail, once curled protectively at his paws, hung rigid, trembling at the tip. His eyes fixed not on the gate or the empty lane, but on the bend in the road where the noise grew louder. She hesitated, clutching her satchel closer, watching as his body leaned forward into the wind, almost expectant. The truck rounded the corner, an old transport vehicle rattling under its load of sugarcane. Its exhaust curled into the dusk, choking the quiet with the bitter scent of fuel. The driver hardly glanced at the animal, but the dog's entire frame quivered. He barked once, sharp and cutting through the air like a warning. Then he bounded forward, not toward the truck but across its path, forcing it to slow with an impatient screech of brakes. The teacher's heart lurched. This was no hungry stray risking scraps. It was something deliberate, something meant to halt the road itself. The driver leaned out, cursing under his breath, but the dog held his ground, shoulders squared, breath harsh in the cooling air. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of the truck's idle engine and the insistent pulse of the dog's bark. The teacher felt the stir of unease crawl through her. This was no simple waiting. This was guarding. The truck rattled off at last, muttering down the lane, and the dog turned back, not toward her, not toward the scattered homes, but toward the gate again. He returned to his place and sank onto the ground, but the restlessness had not left him. His eyes flicked often now to the road, his breathing shallow, chest rising in quick bursts as if bracing for something unseen. From behind the school wall came a sound no one else noticed at first, a faint metallic creak, followed by the scrape of wood. The teacher froze, listening. It came again, this time clearer, echoing like a latch shifting against iron. She stepped closer, peering through the gap where the rusted bars met stone. Inside the deserted yard, the wind tugged at the shutter of an abandoned storeroom, the hinges whining under its pull. Nothing more, but the dog's ears had caught it instantly. He rose again, his body angled, the line of his spine stiff with alertness. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of oil, of something scorched and out of place. It drifted from within the school grounds, subtle but undeniable. The teacher pressed her scarf tighter around her shoulders, unsettled by the mingling scents, chalk dust, exhaust, and that faint, acrid edge. The dog stepped closer to the gate, pressing his nose between the bars, growling low in his throat. Then, as if struck by a memory, he sat back down with deliberate calm. His growl ceased, but his eyes remained pinned to the darkening yard, as though whatever he waited for lay not on the street but inside those locked grounds. The stillness returned, yet it felt different now, heavier, charged with something withheld. The teacher lingered longer than she meant to, staring at him. She thought of his bark, the way he had thrown himself before the truck, not for food, not for play. He was holding vigil, but for whom? The sun dipped, pulling a wash of violet across the rooftops. A silence fell so complete that even the sparrows hushed. In that silence the dog shifted once more, curling low to the ground, eyes fixed on the shutter still rocking faintly on its hinge. And in that moment she understood. He was not waiting for someone to emerge from the road. He was waiting for what might still be hidden inside. The schoolyard lay hushed in the amber quiet of late afternoon, its gates locked now, its laughter long gone. The dog was still there, pressed against the cool iron, his paws powdered with dust. A crow wheeled above the neem trees, its call cracking the silence. The teacher, who had begun to take a slower route home, paused at the corner again. Today, instead of turning away, she let her eyes linger on the animal. His tail was no longer curled tight around his body. It dragged slightly, heavy with fatigue. She noticed it then, a faint patch along his hind leg, darkened and raw, as though some wound had never fully healed. The dog shifted when he realized she was watching, his weight uneven on his legs. There was no sound from him, no whine, no growl, but his stance betrayed strain. Yet still he held to his post. The teacher's fingers tightened around her satchel. For weeks she had dismissed him as nothing more than a fixture of routine, but the sight of injury unsettled her. This was not an idle wanderer bound by habit. Someone, was the anchor. A breeze stirred, carrying with it the smell of parched earth and cooking smoke from distant homes. The dog raised his head, ears pricked, as though he had caught a note within the air that no human could hear. His gaze moved, not to the teacher, not to the closed gate, but across the road where an old tamarind tree stood. The branches rattled like bones, and for a heartbeat the teacher thought she saw his body tense as if in recognition, his posture less about waiting and more about guarding. That evening, children passed by in pairs, their chatter softened by the dimming light. Some slowed, pointing at the animal, whispering. One boy broke away, clutching a battered satchel against his chest. He did not approach, but stood across the narrow lane, staring. His face held none of the boldness of the others. Instead, there was a wary familiarity. The dog's ears shifted, his body leaning ever so slightly in the boy's direction. The moment hung, taut, until the child's guardian called sharply from down the road. The boy turned, and in that turning, Something flickered. Relief, perhaps, or the weight of recognition unspoken. The teacher remained rooted. The pieces she had held in her mind, of a stray, of routine, no longer aligned. This dog was not here for scraps, nor out of randomness. His loyalty, his wound, the watchfulness in his eyes, they circled something larger, something just out of sight. Clouds had gathered without notice, veiling the moon. The smell of impending rain thickened the air. A drizzle began, faint but persistent, tapping the corrugated roof of the school shed. The children were gone now. Only the teacher and the dog shared the lane. The animal lifted himself, painfully, water threading down his muzzle, and walked a few steps toward the gate. He stopped, nose brushing the bars as if expecting them to open from the inside. Then he turned his head sharply to the road once more, ears rigid, body taut. The teacher followed his gaze. The lane was empty, save for the tamarind tree's shivering outline. Yet the dog did not relax. His wound shivered with strain, his breath quickened, his stillness now edged with vigilance. The drizzle deepened into rain, washing the dust from the stones, beating against his fur. He did not move from his post. She felt an unease she could not name, less about pity, more about the sense of standing at the edge of a story not meant for her. A truth was there, hidden in plain sight, pressed into the wet ground by his patient vigil. Her hand tightened on her satchel strap, torn between stepping closer and leaving the mystery intact. The rain whispered harder, drowning small sounds, blurring the outlines of houses. The dog did not flinch. He pressed his weight against the gate, eyes unwavering. His silence carried more than hunger, more than habit. When the thunder cracked, startling birds into flight, she saw it, just for a second. In the flash of lightning, the dog's eyes were not on the school at all. They were fixed beyond, locked on the tamarind tree's dark hollow, as though that was where the real waiting lived. The teacher's breath caught. The story she thought she understood had just shifted, its meaning sliding into shadow. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the village streets slick and silvered with runoff. The tamarind tree stood heavy with rain, its branches dripping, its hollow dark and glistening. The dog remained where he had been through the night, pressed to the iron gate, his wound stiff but carried without complaint. When the teacher returned in the early light, shawl drawn close against the chill, she found him still there, eyes not on the school but on the shadow beneath that tree. For a moment she thought she imagined the sound, a faint scuff, the fragile drag of cloth against bark. Then a boy emerged from the hollow, not in a uniform, not in the quick stride of one late for lessons, but slowly, as though each step weighed more than his body. His face was pale, his shirt frayed at the edges, and his satchel hung loose across his back. The dog rose, unsteady, and moved toward him. The boy did not flinch. He reached down, brushing his fingers along the dog's wet fur, and though his expression was drawn, the tension in his shoulders eased. The teacher watched silently, a realization gathering in her chest. This was not a stray lingering for scraps. This was a guardian, tethered not to the school but to a child who no longer entered it. The truth settled heavy in the damp morning. The boy had once been among the students who spilled from those gates each day, yet something, perhaps an illness, perhaps loss, had pulled him away from that rhythm. And the dog, carrying his injury like a quiet oath, had continued to wait at the place where the boy's absence echoed loudest. Each afternoon, vigil had not been for food or chance kindness. It had been loyalty fixed in place, a bond unbroken by silence. The teacher's eyes dropped to the wound along the animal's leg. She understood now. He had taken it protecting the boy, perhaps from some accident near the road or the fields. The scar was less about suffering than about the cost of keeping watch, and so he had remained, rain or heat, beside the gate that no longer opened for the one he followed. The boy sank down beside the tamarind's roots, leaning into the dog's flank. The animal lowered himself with care, curling protectively though his body trembled with fatigue. Neither looked toward the school. Instead, they gazed across the lane, where the fields stretched wide and the horizon blurred in the rising mist. It was not defiance nor shame. It was simply acceptance, a quiet understanding that their world had shifted, and yet their place within it remained bound together. The teacher stepped back, letting the drizzle beat against her hair. There was nothing for her to interfere with, nothing for her to mend. She felt instead the weight of recognition. Not every vigil ends with return. Some are a way of carrying memory, of refusing to let absence erase what once was. In the dog's patience, in the boy's tired presence, there was dignity, unspoken and unshaken. The village stirred awake around them, the call of vendors, the rattle of pots, but it seemed distant, muted by the gravity of that single image. The boy pressed his hand into the dog's fur as though drawing warmth, the dog's head resting on his knee. Their stillness was its own language, one that needed no witness, yet had found one anyway. As the sun broke weakly through the thinning clouds, light fell across the gate, drying its iron bars. The dog did not move. He did not need to. The waiting had been explained, its silence filled. His eyes softened, not with relief, not with surrender, but with the calm of one who knows he has done his duty. The teacher turned away at last, her sandals leaving faint prints on the wet stones. She did not look back. The scene was not hers to claim, only to carry. Behind her, the mist rolled low over the fields. The boy and the dog remained at the tamarin's base, two figures pressed close against the quiet of morning. And when the breeze shifted, lifting the last drops from the branches, it scattered them like fragments of memory into the open air. The gate stood empty now, its purpose fulfilled only in absence. A vigil ended not with noise or revelation, but with the simple truth of companionship, weathered, scarred, and steadfast.